So my name is Michael Carter. I'm the director of the History Club, Monroe County History Club. Welcome to my wife, Paulette. She's here every time, and my cousin's back there. Can you believe it's been 2 months? We took the month of December off. It didn't seem like that's a big a deal, but it seems like it's been 6 months since we were last here. So I'm glad we're finally getting back to it. We've been at this a long time. This is going on our almost 11 years now. We've given programs here. I want to thank the American Legion. They've been our gracious host for a long time. And thanks to the wait staff. Brooke's probably overwhelmed, so hang in there, Brooke. It'll work out. She's getting some help here. They work hard, so be generous with the wait staff. And thanks so much to Cats TV as well. When they came on board in 2015, things seemed to really pick up for us. Dave's our cameraman today, as he is almost every time. And he's got a helper with him too. He does a great job. Yeah, many people can't attend because they have real jobs, a lot of people, or because they live far away, and this allows them to be a part of our audience after I get these uploaded to YouTube, which is usually a few days to a week after the live program. And believe it or not, a lot of people who don't live around here watch these because they contact me and tell me. I hear from them. And so far we have over 90 programs on YouTube, which is kind of amazing. I never thought we'd get that many. So I'd say go for 100 or 150 if I live long enough. And if you want to watch any of these past presentations, just get on YouTube and type Monroe County History Club in the search engine, and they'll come right up. Also, thanks to some other supporting groups here. Of course, the Monroe County History Center, which I'm on the board, been on the board the last few years. Monroe County Public Library, IU Photo Archives, and of course, Cats TV and more. We've done presentations on so many different subjects, and the good part is we have many more yet to go. How many new attendees do we have today? Anybody new? Seems like I saw a few fresh faces here. If you want to get on our direct emailing list, leave your emails with me. A lot of people aren't on Facebook, so we can send you regular emails through my friend George Carpenter, who can't be here today. Right now, I'd like to have a couple of words by Glenda Murray, I should say. I'm sorry, Glenda Murray. She's the official Monroe County historian, and she has a couple of things to say.
That's all right. Thank you very much. And I'm channeling for a woman up in northern Indiana who, when she retired as a school teacher, decided she needed another project. So she is trying to collect the fight songs and the music and the words for all of the 600 closed Indiana high schools. And we have 6 of them in Monroe County, and I thought maybe we can help her by just coming up with that many for her. So if you know the fight song for one of the schools, Bloomington High School, the one that was downtown, Ellettsville, Smithville, Unionville, somebody sent me Stinesville within 24 hours of my first request. And I'm still hunting for everything connecting university. So if you have any of that, please email me at glmurray@indiana.edu or call the History Center, and they've generously promised to forward your information on to me or give you my email. So thank you, and I'll see if maybe Michael will let me report back after we get more than one. So thanks.
Yeah, maybe I'll do that. I think I will. What? Yeah, but can they see you up here, though? There are a few chairs up here for the folks in the back, if you want. Okay, next, the director of the History Center, my good buddy Daniel Schlegel, needs to say a few words too. Daniel?
All right. It's good to see everybody after our break, and Happy New Year. We have 3 fantastic exhibits that have gone up very recently at the History Center. We have our big barn exhibit about the barns of Monroe County, so it is a great immersive experience, and you can even put on a VR headset and go into a barn while you're standing in the museum. So it's definitely worth coming out to see. We also have an exhibit about the eclipse that is about to happen in April, and the last eclipse, total solar eclipse that happened in 1869. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, definitely come by and see that exhibit. And then while you're at it, just today we finished putting up an exhibit on Reverend Butler. So you want to come by and see his exhibit as well. And then just a quick heads up on some of the things we have going on. We have make your own street signs at the History Center this Saturday. It is open and free to the public. On February 7th, our garage sale will start accepting donations again. So if you do a little spring cleaning, starting February 7th on Wednesdays from 10 until 2, the garage sale site will be accepting donations. And then on the 17th of February, there was a talk here about stone fences. If you missed that or would like to see it again, come out to the History Center on Saturday, February 17th, and you'll be able to see that talk there as well. Otherwise, we have all kinds of great new stuff, including eclipse glasses that just arrived, a lot of other train and eclipse items. I'll be over here to my left after the talk if you're interested in anything. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Daniel. So here's some coming attractions, and we're pretty well filled up for the whole darn year. So I like that. Next month, February 27th, Jill Vance will give a program called To Build a Reservoir, the origin of Monroe Lake. March 26th, Nan Brewer will give a story on the history of the IU School of Fine Arts and Museum, the Eskenazi Museum. She's been there, a curator there for a long time. And on April 30th, Christine Friesel, who's been a speaker many times here, will give a program called Who's Your Character? A digital map of the 19th century. May 28th, Dr. Roger Robison, MD, will give a program called State Championship Teams for Monroe County Schools, 1904 to 2014. June 25th, Kurt Sylvester, who's the state president of the Indiana Genealogical Society, will be here. He'll give a program on some of the early settler families of Monroe County, who they were and what they brought to this county. July 30th, Cats TV, God willing, will give a program on themselves, the history of Cats TV. They've been here 50 years, serving the public here. August 27th, John Summerlot, another fellow that's been here quite a few times, will get a look at the, we'll look at the racially restrictive property covenants in Monroe County's past. A lot of us probably don't know much about that. I don't, so I'm looking forward to that. September 24th. Oh, okay. Am I right here? All right. We'll give a history of the University High School. Any U School graduates here? I know one. Yeah, there she is. I thought that was only fair since we did one on BHS not too long ago. October 29th will be the history of Bloomington, Monroe County by Glenda Murray. We just had a few words here. She's the official historian. November 26th, a story on a program on Smithville. Indians, pioneers, ski bows, and Lake Monroe. Rosie Gersman will introduce you to family names and individuals that helped the area of Monroe County. And so that brings us to today. Dr. John Butler, who's given 3 or 4 programs here before. I'm not going to mention that. I'm going to mention these here because you can catch them on YouTube. One of them is called The Flood and the Drought of 1913. Now, nobody knows anything about that, I'll bet. But it's a great program he gave a few years ago, and you can easily find that on YouTube on our site. And another one was called The Transportation History of Monroe County, another great program. This one today is called Depots, Platforms, and Flagstops, A History of the Railroad Stations in Monroe County. So I'll let John inform you about that.
Thank you. All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for the big turnout coming out on a rainy day in January. I appreciate it. So here we go. Depots, Platforms, and Flagstops, A History of Railroad Stations in Monroe County by me, John Butler. I have a PhD from Indiana University in 20th century US history, and I specialized in landscape and transportation. So that's what I did. All right, special thanks. These are all people who helped me in this program by providing information that I wouldn't have found somewhere else. And Amy Butler and James Butler lived the program for the last few months, so they got drugged to every place. So thanks to all these people, they made it possible. I'd also like to thank the Monon Railroad Historical Technical Society. They maintain an excellent paper archive and a photographic archive. It's made up of people who want to preserve the memory and history of the Monon Railroad. Its membership is open, and if you come to programs like this, you really ought to think about joining a society like that. One of the perks is there's a magazine that comes out 4 times a year, and you can get great articles like this one written by myself about the history of Bloomington's train stations. All right, this all started a long, long time ago, 30-some years ago, when I received this book. I don't know, it's probably 12, something like that. And I loved it. It's The Monon Route by George Hilton. I love the pictures in the book. And there was this one picture that really captured my imagination because it was a picture of downtown Bloomington. It's the Monon Centennial. This is in 1947. And when I was looking at this picture, I was like, wow, where was that in town? As a little kid, I couldn't place it. And then eventually I noticed that there was this grain elevator, and there was this smokestack, and those were still there. And so I thought, oh, it's downtown. And then one day while I was downtown, I was sitting in the drive-in bank drive-through, and I looked up, well, I was sitting there with my dad, and I looked up, and that telephone pole was still there. How could all this stuff be gone in the lifetime of one telephone pole? And I've been trying to figure that out ever since. And so this is part of that story. I may not still have it answered, but it's part of that story. And there's my telephone pole in 2000. It's not there anymore, but it made it into the 2000s. Okay, I'm gonna use these terms a lot, so I'm gonna clarify how they're used. Station versus depot. The railroad has very clear ideas about how these terms are used. A station is any named spot on the railroad. So this is just a list of stations right here. So it doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, it's a named point. A depot is a building. So this is the Lafayette, Indiana Monon Passenger Depot. And the Monon had a Lafayette, Indiana passenger station. That was the named point. And then the named point contained the depot. I'm gonna give you a few examples, and then we're gonna move on. So here's Dearborn Station. This is in Chicago. This is where the Monon ended. So if you got off the train in Chicago, that's where you got off. And this is the head house, the terminal building. This is the depot building. This is also a picture of Dearborn Station. This is everything else that's part of Dearborn Station. We can see the head house. There it is, or the tower sticking up. But there's a train shed. That's there. The platforms along the sides, the track, the switches, everything is part of Dearborn Station. So there's a depot, and then there's everything else. Here's another example, Stinesville Station. Here's a map of Stinesville Station. It includes the depot, the coal house, the station platform, the mail crane, the privy, the main track, the passing track. Here's a picture of Stinesville Depot. All right, see the difference? Here's a picture of National Station. There is no depot at National. There never was a depot at National. National consisted of a sign, a switch, and a telephone booth. Okay, so you got station, you got depot. All right, now we're gonna move on. Monon Railroad. I'm gonna call this the Monon Railroad throughout this presentation, but the Monon Railroad was hardly ever called the Monon Railroad. It had every other name instead. First was the New Albany and Salem, then the Louisville, New Albany and Chicago, then the Chicago, Indianapolis, and Louisville. I'm just gonna call it the Monon. That's what people in Indiana did. They called it the Monon Route. This is from that Lafayette train station done in beautiful southern Indiana limestone. 1901 Monon Route. And the reason they call it the Monon is because the two legs of the Monon crossed in Monon, Indiana. So we're just gonna call it Monon. Don't worry about the rest of the stuff. Now for this program, the Monon in Monroe County, it comes in the south central part of the county, straight north to Bloomington, and then angles out northwest to Stinesville. So that's what we're gonna cover. First place we're coming to is Harrodsburg, so we're gonna start in the south. Now, I've got two numbers on here. I'm gonna explain these real quick. Milepost 232.4 and station number 119. Mileposts are just the distance from Dearborn Station in Chicago. So Harrodsburg is 232.4 miles away. And every station's gonna have a milepost. Now, the station number, it's from station lists. And these are just sequential. So it just goes 110, 111, 112. It doesn't have any geographical meaning necessarily. It's just the number of the stations. So Harrodsburg, milepost 232.4, station number 119. The railroad didn't go to Harrodsburg. It went right by Harrodsburg. Harrodsburg was on a hill, and the railroad was coming up the creek valley, and so, hey, a half mile was as close as they were gonna get. And so when they got to the nearest road crossing, right there with the blue arrow, that's where Harrodsburg Station would be. And that's where Harrodsburg Depot would be. This is from an 1895 map by C.E. Siebenthal. He made the best map I've ever found of Monroe County. I love this map. I'm gonna use it over and over and over again. Thank you, Mr. Siebenthal. And he did it in 1895. He did this by hand. So there's the Harrodsburg Depot just outside of Harrodsburg. Here's some facts. The town was platted in 1836, so it's not a railroad town. It was there before the railroad. It was named after a town in Kentucky. The first depot was built in 1853, probably, could be 54, but probably 53. Cost $1,000. Second depot built 1898, cost $2,529. Cattle pens, $266, and the outhouse was priceless. 2 handcar houses and a 62,000-gallon water tank were built in 1912. The telegraph office was open until 1933, so the depot was open until 1933. It closed sometime, probably when the telegraph office closed, and then the depot was gone before 1947. I don't have an exact date. All I know about the first depot comes from the annual report in 1859, which says the Harrodsburg Wood Passenger and Freight House was second class and cost $1,000. That's it. I have a 1915 station diagram, and this shows us everything we need to know about Harrodsburg. We got the depot, the cinder platform, stock pens. This is the trackage associated with the depot. Got a water tank, a pump house, and they pumped it out of Clear Creek. Harrodsburg got 6 trains a day in 1915 when that map was made. So that's, pretty good for a tiny little town. 3 each way. Here's my oldest picture of the Harrodsburg Depot. There's the depot, the bridge is in the background, water tank in the background. This is probably my next oldest picture. Notice how the depot is sitting on stones? The Monon often put the depot on the low side of the tracks, and they didn't really put much of a foundation under it. They would just build it up with limestone. This made the depots cheap to build. If you put them on the high side of the track, you'd have to move earth. So you put them on the low side of the track and you just block them up. It's not identified, but I can tell you these people are waiting for a northbound train. I know that because of the position of the baggage cart. It's going to be positioned by where the head end of the train is going to stop. And so it's going to be coming in the station heading north. And those guys, they're probably waiting to sell some newspapers to the people on the train. Here's the section gang at Harrodsburg. They're the guys who have the section car house or the hand car house. There were two section gangs. One worked north from Harrodsburg, one worked south. They were responsible for a couple miles of track. And those are the guys who maintained it. Here's a train coming into Harrodsburg. They probably took this picture because of the flood, but I really like this picture because it shows what these little depots were all about, these rural depots. On the platform, we have milk cans. So the farmers are bringing in their milk. The milk's going to go to the city, maybe Bloomington, maybe to Johnson's Creamery, where it's going to be processed, then it's going to be sold out to people as milk. Then the cans go back, right? And then the farmers fill them up again and repeat it. In the background there, we have piles of logs. Lots of timber was cut from southern Indiana. That was one of the main businesses that they did. And then behind that, we can see the stock pens. All the farmers who want to get new stock, it's going to come in that way. And also every time they sell their stock, so the stuff going to Chicago and the slaughterhouses are going to go through the stock pens like that. So this is what little depots did. They gathered up the produce of the rural area. Harrodsburg was famous for mules. They provided mules for the Louisville streetcar line. This is not the Louisville streetcar line. I could not find a picture of the Louisville streetcar line mules. Here's my only dated picture of Harrodsburg, 1924. Here's my last picture of the Harrodsburg Depot. J.F. Bennett, he takes a lot of these Monon photographs. And now we're looking north. You can see the water tower, and just below the water tower, that's the pump house right there. That's in this picture. And this is the last picture I have of a structure standing at Harrodsburg Station. July 4th, 1977. This is the southbound Amtrak Floridian. Why that guy's looking at the switch, I don't know, but something's going on. This is Clay Stuckey took this picture in the late 80s. All that's left is the track and these two automated flashers. Why they ever put those in on this little farm road, I have no idea. Because by the time they put those in, the road had been cut off. 37 comes through, and they dead end the depot road. So the depot road isn't even connected to Harrodsburg anymore. It's still called Depot Hill Road, but it's stub-ended. And the depot would have been where that blue arrow is. There's my son standing in the station site, James Butler. That's the footings of the water tank. That's the remains of the pump house. Bridge is still in, barely. I wouldn't cross it. That's it for Harrodsburg. Now we're moving up the line to Smithville. We're like the local, the accommodation, right? We're gonna make a stop at every little station on the way. Milepost 228.2, station number 118, 4.2 miles from Harrodsburg, which is the second longest distance between stations on the Monon in Monroe County. Just a fact you ought to know. So the Monon had a choice in 1851. They could either go up Little Clear Creek or they could go up Clear Creek. They chose to go up Little Clear Creek. They had to avoid a big hill, and the Smithville Hill. And going up Little Clear Creek, they still wound up going up the hill, but they didn't have to put in nearly as many bridges as if they'd gone the other way up Clear Creek. So they chose the cheaper route. So from Harrodsburg, up Little Clear Creek to Smithville. Smithville's laid out in 1851, which is before the railroad gets there, but it's obviously a railroad town. Look at how it's tilted. Everything in Indiana is on the grid, right? North and south, Northwest Territory. But not Smithville. They're oriented to the railroad. All the lots are 90 degrees to the railroad. So they knew the railroad was coming when they laid out Smithville. George Smith gave up most of the land, or sold most of the lots for Smithville. Mansfield Bennett sold a few as well. If it had been the other way around, we might have had Bennettsburg or Bennettsville, but no, Smithville. Here's my oldest picture of the Smithville Depot. It was quite an unusual building for a couple of reasons. It wasn't owned by the Monon. That's weird. And it was the Smithville store. So there's the Smithville store and depot. There's a roll of fencing wire out in front of it. Now, I'll just read this real quick. Perhaps this is 1908. Perhaps the only Monon agent along the line from Chicago to Louisville who owns his depot is Theodore Thrasher, who's been the railroad official at Smithville since 1865. Mr. Thrasher is a successful merchant and has a store in the same building with the depot. The store building is his, and thus the Monon Station is not on railroad property, but on Mr. Thrasher's private estate. That might be a picture of Mr. Thrasher, right there. He's dressed in the garb of a station agent, but there's no identification. But that might be him. There's the Smithville Depot, looking a little rough for wear. Then in Monday, July 1st, 1918, Theodore Thrasher died. After an illness of several weeks due to the infirmities of old age, Theodore Thrasher, 82 years old, died at 8:30 this morning. Then skip on down. When Mr. Thrasher resigned as Monon agent at Smithville last November, that road lost its oldest employee from point of service. He became agent at Smithville Station 52 years ago at the time the road was completed into the little town. He had enjoyed remarkably good health and had been at the depot every day doing all the work himself until the day he turned the office over to Charles Deckard, who was checked in as his successor. Mr. Thrasher saw the Monon improve from a small railroad to one of the most important of its size in the country. When he accepted the position as agent, there were no telegraph wires, and wood was used instead of coal to fire the engines. Because of his long and faithful service, the Monon officials told Mr. Thrasher at the time of his resignation that he would be kept on the payroll of the company the remainder of his life. Which is cool, but he didn't live that much longer after he retired, right? And it was also good for the Monon, too, because they got to keep using his building as long as he was on the payroll. But after he died, the deal was over. And apparently his heirs, or whoever wound up with the building, didn't want to continue it. And so the Monon lost their Smithville Depot. Now, what happened to this building, I'm not entirely sure. There is a rumor that it was moved and incorporated into a house. Perhaps the bones of the building still exist. This is the only original Monon Depot that we have in Monroe County that we have any photos of. What happened next? Well, hold on. Where was it? Let's do that. So it was on the south side of Smithville, and it was right where the railroad and the road came together, and it forms a triangle here. It's not shown on my 1895 map because the Monon didn't own the depot, right? It's a store, so they didn't put it on the map. Here's a map that shows it. It's that square down there. The platform's a rectangle in front of it. Here's Smithville today. I have to draw the railroad in red. But if you do that, then you can see there's our little triangle, and there's where the depot should have sat. It's not there now. It would have been kind of in front of that tree, partly on the road, I think. We're looking railroad south in this picture. So what happened in the meantime? I think Smithville didn't really have a depot from 1918 into the mid-20s, and the train just stopped in the middle of town. This is the middle of town, hard to believe. There's Redmond Hall in the background. Here's the facility of, I think, the only facility the railroad had. You cross the bridge. Get off the train, cross the bridge, don't fall in the ditch. Welcome to Smithville. There's Redmond Hall today, still there. And that bank is where the railroad would have been. I have a 1927 map of the Clear Creek Quarry District, and if you zoom in, it shows a depot in Smithville, and the depot's in a different spot. The old depot is the orange, the new depot right there is the blue spot. So they moved the depot when they put in a second depot in Smithville. What was that depot? Probably a boxcar. So what they would do, this isn't Smithville, we don't have a picture of the Smithville boxcar, but what they would do is they would just take a boxcar off of its wheels, set it beside the railroad, and call that a depot. This is Avoca, Indiana, and that's the Avoca, Indiana Depot. Some of the nicest accommodations. So where was the boxcar depot? Probably somewhere on that bank near the blue arrow, I don't know, up or down a little bit. There's my wife, Amy, and James enjoying a very cold day in Smithville. Next is Sanders, originally known as Limestone. It gets two different mileposts. I don't know. They move their mileposts around over time. Station number 114, 1.9 miles from Smithville, which I find a little hard to believe because I think they monkeyed with their mileposts. Sanders, the town, is platted in 1892. It's definitely a railroad town, and it's a railroad limestone town. That's why it was called Limestone first. The post office comes about in 1893. The freight house, 1924. They had a freight house? Yeah, they did. And then there's a depot, frame, no size listed, that existed until at least 1935 when it was listed as closed. No date listed for when it closed. So there's Limestone, just north of Smithville, goes around a curve, then came into Limestone, which becomes Sanders. There's the depot marked on my 1895 map. This is the only indication I have that there was ever a depot on the east side of the tracks. I don't know much. That's all it shows me. What were they doing in Sanders? Well, the Monon now issues tickets at reduced rates for quarrymen working in the Crafton district and also as far as Sanders and the Adams Brothers quarry. So that's why they're going to Sanders. It's a quarry town. Here's the picture of the Sanders Freight House, 1924. It was a 12 by 12 building. It was 9 foot on the tall side, 8 foot on the short side, had 1 window and 1 door. That's about the most meager station you could build. Where was it? I think it probably sat on the west side of the tracks in Sanders. Here's a 1927 map showing that. Here's Sanders today. The orange arrow is the Sanders store. That's pretty much the historic heart of downtown Sanders. And then the blue arrow is where the depot or depots would have been. There's my suffering family standing in the depot site. Looking railroad north this time. Not much going on in Sanders. How about this one? Johnson's Switch. I didn't even know about this before I started this project. Johnson's, also known as Johnson's Switch. It appears on the timetables from 1902 till past 1920. I quit looking for it after that. It was the next switch north from Limestone. It appears on the bottom of the timetables, like kind of an addendum, a little note. Acme, Johnson, Sanders, and Peerless are flag stations for numbers 7 and 8. And it just stays down there at the bottom of the timetable year after year after year. It's a quarry stop. This is Johnson's by 1923. They have mills, they have quarry tracks. Workers are going to Johnson's. Johnson's had a depot. It was a boxcar depot. The Monon loved these things. It was valued at $15. That's in 1917, though, but still. Acme, the next station, another one I had no idea about. Literally the next switch. That's all I know about it. What were my dates? 1901 to 1908. It was a stop for, once again, limestone workers. Next place is Clear Creek, milepost 224.2, station number 113, 2.1 miles from Sanders. Clear Creek Station. So the church was founded in 1838, way before the railroad. But the town's not founded until 1854, so it is a railroad town. The depot's not built until 1893. It cost $1,507. They built stock pens. There was a scale. They had 2 handcar houses. The depot sat right in the crook of the road where it met the railroad in Clear Creek. Here's a map of Clear Creek, and if we zoom in, we can see the depot platform, the road crossing. There's where the road goes over the railroad. Depot's nestled in between. The stock pens, the scales. Farmers were always worried that they were getting ripped off. They would deliver their cattle, the cattle would get hauled by the railroad, it'd go to Chicago, and they weren't as heavy as when they'd left. And so to protect from, people accusing each other of messing with, losing weight on their livestock, the railroad would weigh them. And they said, well, it weighed whatever cows weigh when it came in. In 1924, something kind of remarkable happened to the Clear Creek Depot. They cut it in half. Originally, it was sort of this square building, and it ran out of room. It was so busy that they didn't have enough space. And so what they did was they cut one end of the building, the north end, moved it 18 feet, and added in 18 more feet of depot space. They added on to the office, and they added on to the freight room. So that's the part that was really busy. So on the left was the passengers, the middle, the office has the telegrapher, and the telegraphers bump out, the station masters bump out, then he can see up and down the tracks, and then the freight room. This is probably a picture of the depot before it was modified. I can't tell you for sure, but I'll tell you why I think it's that way. Number one, got kind of a squat shadow. Yeah, that's not much evidence, but okay. Number two, the depot gets heavily modified, remodeled in my next picture. And I'm thinking the reason they remodeled it is because they cut 18 feet and moved it and rebuilt it. Also, I know this is the oldest picture because there are no telephone lines coming into the building right here. The chimney is square, and the foundation looks like that. Now, here's my next picture. It got a new paint job, got a new foundation, and it gets a new chimney. And I don't think you'd make all three of those changes unless you were really working on the building, and I think that's when they moved the end, 1924. The chimney becomes a big focus for me. They add a wider top to it, and I use this wider top to identify all my photos of Clear Creek. You'll see. And there's where the telephone line comes in that wasn't there before. So the guy who took that picture, go back here, you can see his shadow, Charles Shaw. He turns his camera around and he takes a picture of the rest of Clear Creek, which is pretty cool. Nobody ever does that. They take one picture, right? And they're done. But he took two pictures. And you can see part of the station, there's signals, there's the crossing. This little building is maybe the outhouse, I don't know. Those houses are still there. This is a picture I was gonna cut, enjoy it. Here, early 1940s. The reason I say early 1940s is how long does it take a chimney to fall apart? We've got this picture and it's starting to fall apart. And then we got this picture from 49 and that chimney is about had it. So, and this picture is dated. This is 1950 Clear Creek. This is taken by John Barriger, who was the president of the Monon, and it's taken from his private car. He's heading south on the Monon. He's standing on the back of his car, and he's taking this picture of the depot as he goes by. Depot's got a fresh coat of paint. Barriger fixed up the railroad. Not personally. And then through the 1950s into the 1960s, Clear Creek Depot doesn't change much. It's just a well-maintained, nice little depot. Here it is from the south. There's maybe our outhouse. There's the country store that was at Clear Creek in the corner, gas station and country store. Rare view from the north, 67. Now from here on out, the depot starts going south. Well, it doesn't move, it just falls apart. Cab view, 71, the brown paint's starting to show through. The weeds are growing up. L&N takes over and it's not gonna get any better. This is the summer of 1971, and by 75, the depot's closed down. And they've cut off the train order signal. See the train order signal? Gone. This picture really threw me because the building was telling me it was 1975, but that locomotive was saying it wasn't. But actually what happened was the Monon, or the L&N donated an old Monon locomotive to a Kentucky Railroad Museum, and it went by the depot in 1975. So my sense of time was restored. This is a 1976, and that depot's still hanging in there. It's probably the prettiest picture I have of the Clear Creek Depot. Love the colors. And here's another southbound Floridian. That train never looked nice. And you can see there's a pile of dirt by the depot right there. Something's about to happen in 1977. The Monon slated this building for demolition, but a guy named Johnny Baker got a hold of the building instead. Spent his life fortune to buy the building, also got the Ellettsville depot, moved them out to his property, was gonna open a railroad museum. It didn't happen because of zoning and neighbors. But there it is, still today out by Smithville. So the depot exists. So there's where it was, right in the crook of the road on South Rogers there. And here's the site today. Well, last December. Next up would be McDo, but we're going to skip McDo because it wasn't there in 1854. It shows up later. We'll come back to it. And we'll go to Bloomington, milepost 220.5, station number 111. It was known as Kirkwood Avenue from 1891 to 1897, and it was 3.7 miles from Clear Creek. Bloomington Station has a bunch of depots. I'm going to go through them real quick. First depot built 1853, cost $6,500. Burned 1868. Second depot built 1868, torn down 1911. Third depot splits the jobs. The first two were Combination stations, they did everything in one building. The third depot was a passenger depot, and at the same time, they built a freight depot. Those were both built in 1911 and both torn down in 67. They also had cattle pen, handcar houses, crossing guard shanties, platforms, other stuff I'm not even gonna try to keep track of. So 1854 depot number 1, brick construction, combination type, passenger and freight, and it was a run-through depot. Just like in Harrodsburg, I don't have any pictures of it, but I know that the Bloomington brick passenger and freight house was first class and cost $6,500. Notice Gosport was also brick passenger and freight house and cost about the same amount of money. They were twins. They're basically the same building. Gosport cost a little more because I think of site work, so the foundations. So since the Bloomington depot has gone so quickly, we have no pictures, no drawings, nothing. We're gonna look at the Gosport depot for 1 second, just to talk about the Bloomington one. So that's what the Gosport depot used to look like, and that's why I called it a run-through depot, because it has the spot where the trains could run through. They didn't actually run through, that's a bad name. Instead, they pushed cars into it, and they would spot the car in it, and then it would be unloaded inside the depot. The interior part of the depot was basically all for freight. Passengers used just the front corner right here, and then they loaded outside the depot. Shows you who's important. Bloomington Depot would have worked the same way and looked basically the same, but we don't have any pictures of it because it burns down. May 6th, 1868, 4 in the morning, they find the depot engulfed in flames. They don't know what caused it, probably lightning, but it was a total loss. All that they recovered was the safe. So they rebuild it, and 1868, depot number 2, brick construction, same as before. Basically, they build the same building, they shorten it up at both ends. That's what they say. So by November 11th, 1868, the new depot was open. So that's pretty good, you know, same year, rebuilt. This 1883 Sanborn map shows where the depot was, right here, between 4th and 5th, between College, and they call it Railroad, that's Morton. Diagonal from the public square, kind of across from where the Irish Lion is today. Here's a west view from the courthouse, a panoramic view. And if you look in the far left side there, you can see our run-through depot in its run-through configuration. These cars right here, they're on the run-through track. There's the depot. It's the only picture I have showing the Bloomington Depot with the run-through track. In 1892, our map shows the run-through track. See it there with the blue arrow? And then in 1898, it's gone. So they modified the building. They took out the run-through track, probably because it was a little bit dangerous to have trains going through the depot, but also because they needed the space. Get rid of the train track, you now have more room inside that building to store freight. So they modify it sometime between 1892 and 1898. Here's a picture of it with the run-through removed. 1905, probably students changing classes here. 1906, homeward bound in June, these are definitely students. And we can see the depot without the run-through, but they've also added the telegrapher's bump out right there. When that picture was taken, 1906, there were 10 trains a day on the Monon, 5 north, 5 south. 1906, people started coming up with some fantasy depots for Bloomington. The Illinois Central was being built into town, and so they were wondering, what would the Illinois Central Depot look like? Will it be really fancy? Will it have a tower? Will it be kind of like Chicago? I mean, we're pretty important. No. How about the Monon? Maybe the Monon will rebuild their depot. I mean, we're getting a new courthouse. Things are looking up. Bloomington's a town on the rise. No, the Monon's not going to build a new station. But they do put in some flower beds and some new curbs. Trying. This is my last picture of the second depot. It's the 1909 Champaign football special. They're going to Illinois to play football. Right here's also my first picture of an automobile at the depot. Kind of cool. Depot number 3, Limestone, finally. Passenger depot. You know, the mill owners and the quarry owners in Bloomington were like, hey, build it out of limestone. And depot number 4, built at the same time, is a brick freight house. So what they do is they put it in the same place where the depot's always been for the passenger building, But then they moved the freight building across the tracks. So now they have two buildings doing the functions that were in one building before. The passenger station has office in the north, all the waiting rooms in the middle, and baggage on the south. Freight station, office north, all the rest is freight. The new depot's in use by May 23rd, 1912. You'd think everybody'd rush down to take some pictures of it. I wish they had, but they didn't. I've got an old postcard that's probably from about when the depot opened up, but I don't have any 1912 photographs. This is the oldest photograph I have of the depot, and it's showing the platform area. There's the depot, barely in the picture. I love this photograph though, because it's like a normal day. Nobody ever takes a picture of a normal day down at the depot. It's always the busy times. But see, even on a normal day, there are quite a few people down here. Nothing special is going on. This is just people getting on the train. Compare it to this. This is when conscription's announced for World War I, or when the first troop trains are leaving for World War I. This is taken the same day. Those are my first pictures of the freight station, by the way, popping up in the background. 1922, the IU baseball team went to Japan. What that guy is doing on the top of the train, I don't know. I hope he makes it to Japan. Here's a bunch of baggage at the depot. I mean, these are all pictures of like incredible events, right? But this is probably the student rush. There's a pile of bags. It's not until probably the 1930s that we get a nice picture of the depot with nothing going on, and that's kind of because there's not as much going on in the 1930s. When the Great Depression hits, passenger train travel declines. But this is a great shot of the depot. Here's the office end, the middle part with the passenger waiting rooms. There's the bump out for the telegrapher. Here's the baggage room. And they got a porch on either end. World War II starts, and passenger train travel goes up. People are gas rationed, they can't drive their own cars, and you've got all the different military travelers on the train. So train travel becomes incredibly crowded during the war. These ladies have joined the Navy. These are waves arriving at the Bloomington train depot, October 10th, 1942. They got their minders there to keep them in line. Army specialists, August 16th, 1943. This is probably just after the war, but judging by the freshly painted window lintels, 1947 or so. Also, this is 46. Hohenberger on the depot platform. In the background, you can see the crossing guard shanty. Here's a picture of the crossing guard shanty shack. So a guy would sit in here and he'd wait for the train to arrive. When the train arrived, he'd jump out and he'd make sure everybody was safe, and then the train would go on and he'd do it again. And he'd do it 10 times a day for the passenger trains and more for the freight. There's one on each end of the depot. Had a little stove to keep him warm in the winter. There was also a freight platform that sat in between the passenger depot and the freight depot. This was put in because the freight depot was so busy, they couldn't handle the volume. So they put in this platform so that people could unload things directly. Don't even put it in the freight building. Just go straight to your car with it, or truck, or wagon. Here's that same platform. By 1947, they cover it. So, hey, you won't even get wet while you're loading stuff outside. And then shows you the relationship. There's the freight depot. There's the passenger depot. Freight depot hardly ever gets photographed. This is like my only picture of the freight depot, so I love it. North end, we've got the offices. That's the part with the windows. The south end, the part with the doors. That's where all the freight went. So it's unloaded from the train cars on this side of the building, goes into the building, comes out into trucks on that side. Pretty simple. Now, when John Barriger takes over, and this is John Barriger collection, and I believe that's John Barriger right there. When he takes over as president of the Monon, he's going to change some things. The Monon's had a hard time. They're always kind of a marginal railroad. They're barely making money. They go from receivership to bankruptcy to receivership. But when Barriger takes over, they've just come out of receivership. He has some money to spend, and he's going to modernize the railroad. And he believes in super railroading. So what's super railroading? Well, that's diesel locomotives. So forget about steam. We're going to go all diesel. And we're going to redo our passenger trains. There's my telephone pole. So we're going to get rid of our old heavyweight passenger cars, and we're going to replace them with modern streamlined cars. Look at all the stainless steel. Gleaming, the new modern seats, forward-facing airline style, comfortable seats. even more comfortable seats on the observation car. Maybe you want to hang out in the diner, bar, lounge car, done in a Kentucky Derby theme. So we have horseshoes on the curtains, horse heads on the lamps. That's the little bar where you could get your drinks. I mean, this is traveling in style. So in the late 40s and into the 50s, the Monon's putting a lot of money into modernizing their passenger service. They keep a great menu. The Monon's known for a great menu. You could get 4 different meals on the train: cheeseburger, omelet, fried corned beef hash, ham, bacon, and eggs. Then you could order sandwiches. You could get potato chips. You could get dessert. And then you could wash that all down with an Alka-Seltzer. Pretty cool. So here's one of these fancy train sets pulling into the Bloomington station, but you see the problem? Where are the people? So the Monon does all these changes, right? They try to bring super railroading, this modern railroading, to Bloomington, but the passengers just don't turn up. And so by the 60s, the depot's looking a little rough, and the Monon's given up on passenger service. They're not going to try super railroading anymore. We still have the rush, 1963. Here's students waiting to go home for Christmas. But it's not nearly as big as it used to be. We still have special events. This is Senator Hartke's re-election campaign. He wins, despite the kind of thin crowd here. This is the sandwich vendor. Forget those fancy menus. We're not gonna have a guy who will make bologna sandwiches for you on the train. Maybe you can buy a candy bar. So that's the vendor right there. And now look at the Monon train sets. We're coming in with a much smaller train, sort of the bare minimum. And so by the 1960s, the Monon's going to be looking to not only get out of the passenger business, but get out of the downtown Bloomington business. They don't really see a need to have a downtown passenger station if they're not going to be doing the passenger business. And what's causing this? It's cars. There they all are, parked out in front of the railroad depot. Forget the grounds. We don't need nice grounds. And here we have one of my last pictures of the depot in use, 1964. Notice these rails right here. These are the rails to the freight depot. They're still in. But you can see from this picture, not much is going on at the freight depot by 1964. It's covered in weeds. The parking lot's gone. They've sold that off to a car lot. And the building's basically closed down. Still there, but really not being used. Now we're going to go to McDo, because that's where the railroad decides to go. They're going to sell off that downtown Bloomington real estate, and they're going to move the passenger stuff to McDo. But I'm going to back up, and we're going to give you the whole history of McDo real quick. Milepost 221.5, station number 112, which they called Livingston. More about that in a minute. It was originally named Bloomington in one of the all-time dumb moves. They're like, we're going to build a yard a mile south of town, and we're going to call it Bloomington. And then we're going to rename Bloomington Kirkwood. It didn't go over. So they gave up on that and called it something else. They named it Yards first. That wasn't very creative. Yards, capital Y. Then they renamed it McDowell in 1910. So the original 1854 locomotive service facility was downtown Bloomington. In 1891, 1892, they move it out of downtown. They move it 1 mile south. Now, McDowell is the largest station in Monroe County by area, by amount of track, by number and size of structures, by tax value, by number of employees, any way you want to measure it. McDowell was the most important place in Bloomington for the Monon. Here we have the engine house and facilities. This is the yard and engine house downtown, 1887. Here is a locomotive on Bloomington's turntable downtown. I have no idea what's going on with the giant snowplow. Here it is, 1892, it's gone. There was no room to expand. That was the main reason. Plus, people in Bloomington were sick of having all this noise and fuss down there, so they moved it out of town. There's McDowell, a whole mile south from Bloomington, in the middle of nowhere. Named after William H. McDowell, who's the Monon president from 1899 to 1909. He gets the McDowell Yards named after him before he's even president. That's pretty good. He's only a vice president then. So I've got this weird letter, and if you zoom in on the letter, it says, after due consideration, they decided that it would be more advisable and advantageous to remove all offices, etc., connected with the Monon route to the southern part of town. This was accordingly done. The shops and offices were formerly situated near the center of town. The new location is in every particular a most desirable place. The site affords a pleasant view from the railroad, and you know that's what the railroad was worried about. And they are now contemplating the erection of a large depot in the new yards. The old depot is now known as Kirkwood Avenue Depot. South Bloomington is certainly on a boom. They are building an enormous roundhouse. Several handsome residences are being erected, some for boarding houses and some for private dwellings. So here's a picture that shows the yard about the time that that letter was written. So we got the boarding houses. We also have a couple restaurants. Railroaders get hungry. And then we have a yard office, dispatcher's office, and it might have been a depot, although that's pretty sketchy. This guy is unloading coal by hand from this car with a shovel. That's a fun job. So this is probably as good a spot as any to talk about the yard office. So the McDo Livingston yard office. First, there was a two-story dispatcher's office and yard office from 1891 to 1907. That burns down. Railroad buildings always burn down. And then they replace it with a one-story yard office, 1908 to 1966. And this is my big claim today. I believe that was a depot from 1908 to 1919. Shocking, I know, right? I've been in an argument for 20 years about this. So that 1902 picture, here's our yard office. And they had dispatchers upstairs. And then they moved the dispatchers to Lafayette, and the upstairs is vacant. And then the yard office burns. Actually, the restaurant catches fire. And then the fire spreads, and then it burns down the yard office. And so immediately, like they always do, when something burns, they're going to build a new building. So in 1907, plans have been accepted by the Monon for the building of a one-story, three-room yards depot at the yards in this city to replace the building that burned last week. The building will be patterned after the New Albany Depot and will have offices for the operator, the yard master, and the wrecking boss. Okay, so they're in pattern after a depot, but it's for yard offices. Okay, I get it. Here's the building. Looks like a depot. Well, it should. It was patterned after a depot. And I didn't really think a whole lot about it until I came across this thing. This is basically like a phone book, Karen's City Directory. And lo and behold, it lists a McDo Station Passenger Depot. Now, a lot of times in the newspaper, they use the words depot and station incorrectly for railroaders. But here they're using both terms. It's like they know what they're talking about. And they say it's a passenger depot. So immediately I went to my Monon friends and I said, look what I found. I found that used to be a depot. And they said, no. Okay, why not? No train ever stopped at McDo. What? Well, yeah, there's no S's, there's no F's. On the timetable, they show F's and S's. See, F, S, F, S. For when trains stop, McDo never has an F or an S. Whether you look in 1901 or 1910 or any other year. So trains never stopped. Okay, how can I argue with the timetable? But it still seemed a little weird. And also, there's other, Dearborn Station, they never show a train stopping there either. Or Louisville, they never show a train stopping. Or Lafayette shops, they never show a train stopping. For there's some reason there are places where they never showed a train stopping. McDowell's one of them. Okay, so I gave up, no way. So I kept looking for stuff. And in 1909, or I found a 1909 fare book, and what a fare book is it shows the prices to go from point A to point B. And this fare book page, and this is the only page I found, is going to Water Valley, which was a tiny little stop, not important. But if you look at the bottom, there's yards. And I could travel from yards, and I could pay $3.35, and I could go to Water Valley. How could I get on at yards if it wasn't a stop? That bothered me. Then I found this, Annual Report of the Railroad Commission of 1912. Right here. passenger accommodations, Bloomington yards, corrected. Okay, now the way this works is if they sent out an inspector or somebody complained, and then the railroad could have said, we don't have passenger facilities. And then the state would have said, you're right, closed. There's nothing to see here. See, closed. Or the state could have said, oh, but you should have passenger facilities. We're gonna have a hearing on this. And then it would be pending. But it doesn't say either one of those things. It just says corrected. So the state of Indiana said, you need to fix your passenger facilities, and the Monon said, sure, and they did it. So there must have been passenger facilities to fix, right? And so what kind of things would they have to fix? Well, the state was really into regulating the railroads at this time, and everything was regulated. So you had to have, the depot had to have a passageway to the adjacent street, had to be well lighted, had to be kept well heated, in improved sanitary conditions, supplied with wholesome water, closets for men and women, bathrooms, and et cetera. It goes on and on. There's a whole bunch of things. So the Monon screwed up one of those things. The depot didn't have heat, the passageway wasn't lighted, something, and then they corrected it. Then there's the weird station list and the name Livingston. When I ran across this, I asked my railroad buddies, why Livingston? And they said, well, we don't know. I said, was it a passenger station? They said, no. Well, what was it? It was a tariff station. It was a station for billing only. So it only existed for paperwork. Okay, they can solve all my problems. So, all right, it's only for billing, only for paperwork. But then in the 1908 timetable, I found this at the bottom. Livingston is a flag stop for number 7. Number 7 is this train, the local. You can't have a flag stop unless it's a place for people to get on and off. Bills don't go to flag stops, right? So Livingston, at least in 1908, was a passenger station. And it was a passenger station, that's number 7, showing you the train. It was a passenger station from timetable number 15, 1908, until timetable number 40, 1919. So you could get on and off at Livingston. And Livingston was the name of McDo. After that, it becomes a billing station. Before that, it was a regular passenger station, I think. Here's another weird thing. This drunk goes into the Bloomington station. He starts tearing up the place. He's yelling and accosting the passengers, and eventually the station agent throws him out the depot, gets him arrested, and bans him for life. Don't ever come back. He goes to the police station. He spends the night in jail. The police tell him, this morning he was released, and he was told that if he was in town this evening, he would be locked up for good. That the lesson had an effect is shown in that he was so eager to get out of town that he walked down to the yards and he caught the 1015 south. He couldn't go to the depot in town. He was banned for life. So he walked down to the yards and he caught a train. It seems pretty, I mean, that's evidence. The 1015 is a first-class passenger train. Look at the building. Boy, it looked like a depot. The left side should be the passenger waiting room. The center is the telegrapher's bump out. The right side should be for freight, but it's not. It's an office in this case. It had a ticket window in the yard office. Why would you build this unless you were going to sell tickets? Look at these guys. They're having a great day, aren't they? I've been that kid before. See the stove? That's the waiting room stove. That should be in the middle of every waiting room. That's where it is. I mean, this is a classic waiting room, minus the benches, because this is taken later. This is when they've converted it fully to a yard office. It had a platform. Yard offices don't need platforms. That is a platform. That's so the passengers can get on and off a train. So for all these reasons, I think that that building was a passenger depot from 1908 to about 1919. Okay, back to the yards. This is the only picture I have of the original roundhouse. There's the original water tank. Guess what happens? It burns. $20,000 fire at the yards. While it was still smoking, they were already cleaning away the rubble so that they could build their new roundhouse. The new roundhouse would hold 15 locomotives, would be even bigger than their old one. And then over the years, they built a whole bunch of other buildings in addition to the roundhouse. So look at all these other shops that they built along here. McDo became a really happening place that was employing hundreds of people. Here's a picture of the shops area. Look at all those wheels. They're replacing wheels on railroad cars. They're working on the railroad cars there. Here's a wonderful picture of McDo from the 1940s. Here's some stuff labeled. Far left is the ice house. There's the yard office that I talked so much about. Scale house, water tower. This is sand. The locomotives use that for traction, and it'd be put in the sand house. They have cinders. The cinders are being emptied out of the locomotives into this pit, and this crane puts them into these cars, and then they're dumped. These steam pipes supply the heat for the coal tower, so the coal tower won't freeze. There's a powerhouse, a machine shop. Here's coal. We zoom in, we can see some more detail. There's the turntable. There's the cinder pit. Locomotives would come in here, they would drop their cinders, dump their fire. They'd be without fire, but they would still have steam in the steam box, enough steam they could get into the turntable, get into the roundhouse, they'd release the steam, and the locomotive would be dead for the night. And then the next day, some guy would build up the fire again, using corn cobs to start it, and then the process would be repeated. There's the roundhouse office. This is the track that would get you to the roundhouse. This is a spur. Sure. Yes, they're burning coal, and the coal leaves behind waste. The waste is cinders. The cinders won't burn completely, and then that is dumped, usually along the railroad tracks as part of the ballast. Look at how many people used to work down there. This is just the roundhouse crew on one of the steam locomotives. And that's on the turntable. Pretty cool picture. 1929. And then when you add in all the other people at the yard office and at the different parts of McDo, we're talking about lots of Bloomingtonians working down at McDo. Now, when Behringer does his dieselization, it changes McDo because diesels need way less people to operate. And so he gets that done by 1949. So we still have a steam locomotive here in the background. They're on their way out. They're going to be replaced by these guys, and that's going to be less work, less maintenance, and you're not really going to need a roundhouse. And the passenger train, remember when I said the passenger train's going out? Well, that's going to have an effect on McDo too, because on November 17th, 1966, effective 7:01 a.m., Monday, November 28th, 1966, the existing passenger station at Bloomington will be closed, and a new station located at Grimes Lane, Bloomington, will be open and in service. Time shown for number 5 and number 6 will apply at the new station. So they moved the station. Bye-bye downtown Bloomington. We're going to sell that station off. The bank's going to buy it, and they're going to tear down that building as quick as they can before it can be saved. And this is what's going to replace it. Now, it seems kind of screwy, right? If you're wanting to get out of the passenger business, why are you building a new passenger station? Well, they're not. They're building a new yard office. And it's going to be a passenger station briefly. So here's the building. Here's a nice color picture of it. Here's the waiting room, which would become the crew room. Here's the yard office part of it. Here's the old yard office, not looking so good. That's why they're building a new one. Matter of fact, they cut the eaves off the old yard office right before they tear it down because they built these new warehouses and it's too tight to get a boxcar through. So they have to cut the eaves off the back of the building. Here's an aerial view of McDo, 1967. Whoops. Next one. And if you zoom in, you can see there's the yard office, there's Grimes Lane. This is now the police station for Switchyard Park. And we can see they had an asphalt platform for the passenger train. Here's the old yard office gone. So September 30th, 1967, the last run of the Thoroughbred, 11 months after the new passenger station's built. And then it's going to become just a yard office. There are a few changes in the yard as well. The roundhouse, most of it gets torn down by 1967. We don't need a roundhouse, we've got diesel locomotives. Also, we need fuel for those diesel locomotives, so they put in a new fuel tank. And here's Dick Fontaine on top of that fuel tank, and this picture is taken by my good friend Ron Markward sometime in the winter. The other thing that was happening in the 60s was a change of generations of railroaders. The old heads were retiring. The guys who'd signed on when the railroad was really in its heyday, that 1900 to 1920 period, they were getting ready to retire by the 1960s. This is a picture of Ed Meyer's last run. He was an engineer. Here's his friends and family waiting at McDo to greet him as he comes off the train. He worked from December 1906 to 1961, 55 years. Now, he is 73, that's out of the train. So he started on the railroad at 18. There's his grandson, Jimmy Myers. He's 11. He got to make the trip with his grandpa. So when you think about that, 18 years he starts the railroad as a young, basically a boy. And here he is, climbing out of that railroad as an old man. Look at those shiny shoes. They dressed up. And that's his grip that he's carrying. That's where it's not a doctor's bag. That's where they carried their lunch and their coffee thermos and all the stuff they'd need on their runs. And so here he is walking across McDo from his getting down those last run. And what do you get? You get a case of beer and a box of cigars. That's all right. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't any new railroaders after that, but there were fewer railroaders. They weren't hiring as many people to replace the guys who were quitting. Now, here's my good friend, Ron, 9 Joints Markward. Railroaders all had nicknames, every single one of them. And Ron's nickname was 9 Joints, and he got that almost from the inception. He was playing cards in the roundhouse office, and a guy was walking out, and he had a bad look on his face. And another railroader said, "Hey, why do you look mad?" And he said, "I just lost a bunch of money to that damn 9-jointed kid." Well, that was Ron, and they called him 9 Joints ever since then. So here he is early on in his career. Here he is as a fireman. You don't get to just become an engineer. You have to work your way up through the ranks. And some of the guys he worked with, Everett Risenauer, Gib Young, Harold Brown Eyes Huberts, and Earl Sharp. So there are new guys coming on, but there's fewer of them. And they're coming on to a different sort of railroad. It's still busy. The Vietnam War's on. There's still freight to haul. But passenger trains have dropped off, and the freight business is being impacted by trucks. This is 1973. L&N's taken over. This is that warehouse they built. They had to cut off the eaves for the yard office. This is just built in the 60s, and it was supposed to be a train-to-truck warehouse. But look at the train track. Nobody's using that train track. It's just a truck-to-truck rail warehouse. That's what's happening. So as time goes on, the rail business is kind of getting weaker. The guys are still out there working. We got Bud Bacon. I guess if your name's Bud Bacon, you don't need a nickname. Clyde Rufus Delaney and Philip Groundhog Myers, and they're out doing some track work in McDo. But look at the track in McDo. It's starting to look a little rougher. This is sort of in the back area, but still. Now, remember that picture I showed you of the platform? There's a guy in that picture. His name, I believe, was Omer Wagoner. Now, Omer Wagoner, this is 1927. He would go on to have 2 sons. There's Joe Wagoner. That's one of his sons. Joe was a fireman who worked at McDo throughout his life, and his brother, Bill Wagoner, was the yardmaster. So not only did guys work their whole lives there, but generations of people worked there, and that was all going to change. I don't know if Joe Wagoner had kids, but Bill does, and his daughter did not work for the railroad. L&N might bring in shiny new locomotives, but they're not going to put any money into those facilities in McDo. And soon the roundhouse is totally gone, and then it would be the turntable, and then eventually the tracks themselves. And it all gets closed down, not so much because the business collapsed, but because the railroads kept merging, and eventually this becomes duplicated track. All right, so then would be Bloomington, but we're going to skip that because we already did it, and now we're on to Hunters. Milepost 217.9, station number 110, 2.6 miles from Bloomington. Hunters is the switch right here, Hunter Switch. This is the Hunter Valley. It becomes a big limestone area. It's named after this guy, General Morton C. Hunter. He's a Civil War hero, and he's crucial to the Battle of Chickamauga and the Battle of Chattanooga. He disobeys orders, but he wins, and so that makes you a hero. And he comes back from the war. He goes back to Bloomington. He goes back to practicing law. He builds an enormous house that used to sit at 11th and Walnut, right downtown. Got replaced by a really regrettable building. And he took his money from lawyering and he invested into limestone property north and west of town. And so he starts the Hunter Valley, and it's all named after General Hunter. Eventually, there's all sorts of mills out there and quarries out there, and it's really one of the big quarry areas in Bloomington. And I wondered, how did the workers get there? Because I'd run across this weird little newspaper article that said the Red Devil, and that was a passenger train that went to French Lick. The Red Devil now has a competitor, the Red Onion. That's what the boys call the train that carried the workmen to and from the Hunter Quarry districts mornings and evenings. Maybe for the smell, I don't know why Red Onion. But so somehow the workers were getting to this quarry, but that kind of bothered me because a passenger train's not going to come up here, then go all the way up that switch, drop them off, and then try to come back and go on its way. So they're not probably being hauled on a passenger train. So how are they getting there? On a local freight number 44. And it appears on the timetable, 7:05 a.m., good time to go to work. So what they do is they just tack a passenger car into the back of a freight train. Here's the rules that said they could do it. When provided with tickets, passengers may ride on the following freight trains, 44. When more than one section of the above trains are run, only the last section will carry passengers. So if it wasn't very busy, you get stuck onto the back of a stone train and you just ride with your work to work. And if it was busy, you might be on your own little passenger train. But they were essentially a freight train. Now, Hunters had a special significance for people on the railroad, for the engine men on the railroad, because it was the crest of the big grade in Bloomington. All the way from McDo, all the way through town, all the way north of town, the railroad's going up on a grade, going up a hill. And by the time they got to Hunters, that was the make or break point. If they made it over Hunters, they were good. They would make it the rest of their run, or they would get hung up on Hunters, and then they'd have to have somebody come help them. So here's a picture taken from going up Hunters Hill. This is the same day. The sun is now setting. That's how long it's taking them to go up the hill. They're crawling up this hill. But they made it, and once they passed the sign at the top of the hill, they were good to go. So that was Hunters. Where is Hunters today? Well, pretty much under the highway. Here's the spur, and this interchange sits almost entirely on top of Hunters. And so when you go through the 45, 46, 69 interchange, if you look out to the side, you can actually see the quarries and the cuts. Next station is Woodyard, milepost 215.5, station number 109, is also known as Woodyard, Wood and Woods, 2.4 miles from Hunters. Here's the sign. It was about halfway between Bloomington and Ellettsville, way out of town, just beyond Hunters there. It's still halfway between Bloomington and Ellettsville, but we just don't go the same route anymore. Now we take the 45 up here. But here's Woodyard Road, and there's where the depot was. There was a depot. Depot is shown on my 1895 map, my 1912 station diagram, listed in 1915, gone before 35. There was a telephone box in 29, and I imagine when they put in that telephone box, they tore out the depot. So probably 29 is our date. It's first on the timetable in 1889, and it's last on the timetable in 1945. It was a flag stop. The train didn't stop there unless you wanted it to stop there. If you were there, then the train would stop. If you weren't there, it would just drive right on by. Woodyard was not like Bloomington. So there's the depot shown on my 1895 map. Never makes the paper. Here's the only mention I have in the paper. What is said to be the finest bed of violets in Monroe County is near the Woodyard Station, about 3 miles north of Bloomington on the Monon. Many people from Bloomington have visited it and are enthusiastic concerning its beauty. There wasn't as much to do back then, I guess. I don't know. It's not true. There's plenty to do back then. Here's my station diagram, or my map of Wood, station diagram of Wood, and you can see where that blue arrow is. There's my depot. And it's located about 1/3 from this road and 2/3 from the road crossing. So this is where Woodyard Road goes over the railroad, and this is where another road joins in, about 1/3, 2/3. And so if we go to our map today, about 1/3, 2/3, we can see where it should have been. There's my wife standing in front of where the Woodyard Depot should be. And then here's why it was called Woodyard. Because it was a wood yard. They loaded wood there. And this siding right here is where they loaded the wood. This is not a picture of Woodyard, but this is what it would have looked like. All you needed was a hoist. And then you could load the logs onto the cars. So it was a spot where they loaded logs, hence the name, Wood Yard. Now we call it Woodyard Road, like it's. So that's where the logs would have been loaded, right there. Here I am. This is 2 days after getting over COVID, looking kind of rough, standing on the site of where that siding would have been. Next up's Ellettsville, milepost 213.1, station number 108. Ellettsville predates the railroad. It was platted as Richland in 1837. It was named after Edward Ellett, who was a tavern owner and a War of 1812 veteran. This is his son's grave. He died during the Civil War. Ellettsville Station. They have a colorful history for such a little place. First depot, 1853 to 1905, burned in a train wreck. A temporary boxcar depot replaced it, and that was burned by arson. A second depot replaced that, and it was built in one location and moved to another. Finally, they got it in the right spot. Then they had stock pens, coal house, section car house, toilet, telephone box. All I really know about the first station, like usual, is from this list, and it was $1,050 first class. And it sat on the edge of town, just as you came into Ellettsville. And here's what happened to it. Ellettsville, the farm. 9 cars and depot burned, lost $10,000, narrow escape of employees from injury. Last Saturday night, about 9 o'clock, a tremendous crash was heard. The cry of fire was sounded, and soon our people were out to give assistance. The fire was at the depot, the scene of a bad wreck. A through freight having run into the local freight. The local freight was about 4 hours late. It was in charge of conductor J.E. Foland. On arriving at Ellettsville, only a small amount of work was to be done. No train was expected, and hence a flag van had not been put out. The crew was unloading freight at the platform when a through freight came crashing into the rear of the local at a high rate of speed. The local, and this is the real killer part, the local was composed of a caboose and 6 loads of freight. One, a car of matches. Adjoining this, a car of hay. The matches were ignited, the hay served as tinder, and a big blaze was the result. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but the depot burned down. This is basically where the depot would have been. I think it's somewhere in here. I don't have an exact spot. Now there's a nice little park there along the Monon right-of-way in Ellettsville. So then they burned down the temporary depot because it was a boxcar and Ellettsville didn't want to be a boxcar depot town. And now, we don't know it was arson, but in this newspaper article, they say it might have been arson and it might not. But if it was arson, shame on you. I think it was arson. So they replaced it in 1906 with this nice little building, but they built it in the wrong spot. Well, the wrong spot for Ellettsville. Just close up. Red is where it used to be. Blue is where they are going to build it, way out of town. And the people of Ellettsville are not happy about that, but that's where the Monon wants to put it. And you can see, to this day, that's still out of Ellettsville, right? Ellettsville, has grown every direction but that direction. And so that blue square is where or rectangle is where the depot would have been, off of McNeely Drive. Here it is, they built it there, and then the city of Ellettsville promptly complained to the Indiana Railroad Commission, and they made the Monon move it. So here it is in its original location. Here's my son in the original location. He's studying an interestingly circular rock. That's the only remains. I don't even know if it has anything to do with the depot, but it sure is interesting. So then the Monon saw some sense, and the people of Ellettsville agreed, and they moved the depot closer to town, right here in this crook of the curve. So it went from there to there, and they moved it after it was built. Pretty cool. Here it is in its final location. That's Jack's Defeat Creek right there. That's the footbridge over Jack's Defeat Creek. Ellettsville didn't build a bridge. They just built a footbridge. Wagons went right across through the creek. And then there, of course, is our depot. And there's, I think, the outhouse, but maybe not. Here's the footbridge over Jack's Defeat Creek, and you can see the depot in the background. This is the only picture I have of a backside of a depot. Nobody ever takes a backside depot picture. There it is, enjoy. So now here's some pictures of the Ellettsville depot. That's a cool little building. I like that kid's pose. I'm guessing 1940s from the paint job. And then, you know, it's like with all these depots, they take some pictures of it early and then no pictures in middle age and then a bunch of pictures at the end. They're like, oh, this one's not looking so good. Let's take some pictures. So here, 1960, still looking pretty good. 64, all right. 67, sometime a little later. Later yet. Later, uh-oh, they boarded it up, just like Clear Creek. L&N took over. And later yet, and this is right before it's going to move to Baker's Junction. It also gets saved. And here it is gone, 1981. It should be right there. This building's a hotel that dates back from the 1850s. It's still there. There we are at the depot site. There's not a lot there, but there is the remains of this stone wall. See it in that photo? That's the stone wall today. But what's really cool is there are a bunch of names carved into that wall. And they've been carving names in that wall since, oh, I don't know. So if you get to Ellettsville, it's worth a look. Next up is Breyfogle. I was just going to tell you this about Breyfogle, and I was going to be done with it. It was a passing sighting. But then I went to the Monon archives, and I found out that it was more than a passing sighting. It's named after this guy, Dr. William Breyfogle. He's a bad guy. You can boo him. Boo. If you don't know why, don't worry about it. Breyfogle lay just north of Ellettsville, and once again, it's a stone town. It's quarries, it's mills. Breyfogle Station. So first there was a siding built in 1891, but then a depot appears on the map in 1912, and then there's no structures listed in 1915. A 3-year depot? That doesn't make much sense. Telephone box, 1929. It's on the timetable from 1891 till the end. It's named Adams in 1916, because Breyfogle sucked. So this is my map of Breyfogle, Indiana. It shows a depot right here. It's by a creek, it's by a road crossing. That's all I had. I was like, well, this is gonna be so hard to find. There's a close-up showing the depot. It would have been a tiny depot. I don't know if it really was a depot, but it's shown on the map. So first I thought it was where the blue arrow was where the road crossed, and the depot was where the red arrow was. And I was really happy with that. That made so much sense. But it wasn't right. The road wasn't right. It was crossing the wrong way. And Siebenthal never makes a mistake. So something was wrong. So then I found out it was actually way up there. There's the road crossing. There's where the depot was, in the middle of nowhere. But that's where it was. You would have to ask me that, Gene. Maple Grove, and I don't know. I'm not from Ellettsville. DeLapp and Matthews, and then Maple Grove's right here. So there's Maple Grove, this is DeLapp, this is Mount Tabor. Good question. So there's where it is today, even more in the middle of nowhere than it was in 1912. Can't even get to the place without trespassing, so I didn't go. It makes an 1896 railroad atlas as Breyfogle, which sounds like something that happens to you when you get too old. Oh, they got a little brave fogely. It was named Adams in 1960, and Adams is a passing siding. That's really what it was. It was a long siding for most of its history. Stinesville, milepost 207.8, station number 106. 4.4 miles between Breyfogle and Adams, and this is the longest distance between stations on the Monon and Monroe County. Named after this guy, Eusebius Stein. If you had one picture, right, that got taken of you, and you would be remembered by that one picture. It's like your license picture. Like, oh, this is my one picture. Great. He didn't look like that normally. Maybe he did. I don't know. Town platted 1855. Way up here. That's where Stinesville is. We're almost out of the county. This is our last stop in the county. Stinesville, once again, stone town, railroad town. Depot, platform, toilet, 1890. Section car house, 1901. Coal house, undated. Open telegraph office, 1881 to 1949. See the problem with that date? The depot's not going to be built for 9 years, but the telegraph's there? I don't know. On timetable, 1889 to 1949. Stinesville Station. There's the depot, the platform, the main track. We saw this slide earlier. Here's a picture of the depot, train coming in. It was right on the main street, kind of anchored the main street. Now we're looking on the opposite end of the main street. The depot would be down there where that blue arrow is. You can barely see the roof. Everybody's at the depot. Maybe a school trip, I don't know. Nobody's at the depot. Hanging out at the depot. Maybe they're a young couple. I don't know. Here's the spot today. The depot would be where that blue truck is. The railroad would be where the shed is. And there, my suffering wife and son. We're on our way to get our Christmas tree in this picture at the Stinesville station. And there's Main Street, Stinesville. Of all the places, Stinesville's changed the least in some ways. All right, the Monon built a bypass, and this is going to be the story of that, and I'm going to tell it pretty quick. The Indiana Stone Railroad. It was begun in 1898, finished 1899, and it ran from Clear Creek to Harrodsburg. And what it does is it bypasses the Smithville Hill. And it's this bump out. See that? I think Clay said it looked like an aneurysm. He's right. So here's the profile. This shows the grade. So the Smithville was here. Look at the grade on the Smithville line. Really steep. Here's the line that replaces it. Much more gradual. So that's why they did it. Also, there was a bunch of quarry land back in there and stone mills and all sorts of stuff, and so they wanted to get to that. Here's the map of the cutoff line. That's this. Goes around Smithville. They called it the pumpkin vine because it was so curvy. And then eventually Smithville line gets flooded, then it gets stub-ended, then it gets abandoned. So here's 1945. So the cutoff becomes the main part of the railroad. First stop's Clear Creek Junction, just for trains. And it's where the two parts of the railroad came together. There is the Harrodsburg line here, the old line to Harrodsburg. So that's Smithville, that's the new line. This is the quarry line to Maple Hill Quarry. Here it is today. There's the Maple Hill line. Here comes in the new line, and then there's the old Smithville line. National, 1 milepost 1.7. We saw this early, briefly. It's a switch that was right here, and it served the national quarry. There's the switch. There's the spot where the sign sat. There's the sign. There's the spot. That's all of it. If you wanted to make your own sign, here's how you could do it. Here's National 1976. When I saw this picture, I was like, I want to go there. I was like, this is going to be a cool place to visit. I really want to see what this has turned into. And then I found out, oh dear, this whole area has been really modified. There's a highway there now and a sewage treatment plant, and how am I even going to find it? And I decided the way to find it would be to find these two bridges. There's a blue bridge and a red bridge. Well, not really, but to find those two bridges. So I found them on the satellite. There's the blue bridge at the top, the red bridge at the bottom, and National is right in the sewage treatment plant, so not so great to visit, actually. But there's still rail in. Where the railroad crosses the road, right by that sewage treatment plant, you can still see the old rail. This is the only rail that I know of in Monroe County still in. And there it is leading off. Here I am standing trying to see over the fence. Where was National? There's where it was. Somewhere over there. Next up, Henley's Switch. This is even more insignificant than National, also known as Henley's. I just would see it randomly in like newspapers and stuff. I really had no idea where it was. Then I found it on the timetable. Henley's. I was like, well, that helps. So I was like, I'm never going to find it. And then I started working on Diamond, and when I found Diamond, I found Henley's. And here's how it happened. I had this map. It says Diamond. Okay, that's where Diamond is. And then if I zoomed in on the map, it showed me exactly where the sign was. Look, there's the sign. I was like, okay, so I've got exactly where Diamond is. There's the sign. So once I figured that out, Diamond was this switch, then that meant that this switch was Henley's. And sure enough, Henley Stone Company at the top. So Henley was right by Diamond. And right by both of them was a water tower. And this is the only thing that people ever took a picture of. There it is looking north. There it is looking south. But the weird thing is you can still see Diamond and Henley from space. Somebody's mowing this, and it makes you can see the shape. That's where they went right in between that. So there it is from space. Like when I'm way zoomed out on Google Earth, I can find that, no problem. The spot I thought I'd never find. Next up is Ketcham's. Named after Colonel John Ketcham. He was a colonel in the militia, so it's kind of sketchy if he was a colonel. He fought in the War of 1812, settled Ketchams. He's a big-time early character in Monroe County history. There's Ketcham's Mill up there. And you can even see the mill race on this 1895 map. Siebenthal's so good. And there's a picture of Ketcham's Mill. And when the Monon built its bypass railroad, they needed the right-of-way from Ketcham. Colonel Ketcham was dead, but his son was alive, and his son said, yeah, I'll give you the right-of-way, but I don't want to sell it to you. I want something instead. And so they said, what? And he said, well, I'd like you to build me a station and maintain a permanent station and sidetrack. Wouldn't that be great just for me? And the railroad said, well, okay. And so they built a depot for Ketcham at Ketcham's. Gave him a sign. But did they really? So what happens is, alleging that there is a breach of contract because a station is not maintained at Ketcham's Mill, Daniel W. Ketcham, who's the son of the son, administrator of the George Ketcham estate, has filed suit for $5,000 against the Monon. The complaint alleges that at the time the Indiana Stone Company Railroad was built from Clear Creek to Harrodsburg, George Ketcham donated the right-of-way so they could get this station. It is said it was agreed that the station would be built for receiving and delivering passengers and freight. A short time later, the Monon bought the Indiana Stone Company and has not kept an agent at Ketcham's or furnished the station. So they built this building, but they never opened it. Or at least it seems like they might not have. Here's the plans for the building. Here's a picture of the building, but look, it's boarded up. I don't know if anybody was ever able to catch a train in the depot at Ketcham's. So they built a permanent station, they maintained it. Oh, those tricky dudes. So here's where it sat, right there. Map of Ketcham. And here it is from space. There's Ketcham. There's a switch right there. The depot sat right there. And if you go to that site today, you can still see the stones that the depot sat on. Just waiting in the line there for the depot. Next up's Victor. Victor is even the most insignificant of all. Here's its sign. It's another quarry stop. You can still see the quarry they were going to. Blue is Ketcham's, orange is Victor. That was known as the Victor Strait. It was such a curvy railroad, they named the straight section. And Victor had a cinder platform so the quarry workers could get off there. And that's where the cinder platform was. And then last on the Monon is Harrodsburg Junction, station number 119, and this is just for the railroad. Once again, this is just where the two parts of the railroad split. So now I'm going to finish up with the Indianapolis Southern, Illinois Central, Indiana Railroad. They're all the same thing, just over time. The Indianapolis Southern was imagined as a railroad that was going to go from Indianapolis to the coal fields. It was going to bring coal to Indianapolis. It was going to save a lot of people heating money. The builders ran out of money to build the railroad on the way, and the Illinois Central took it over. So here's a map of it, running from Indianapolis through Bloomington and connecting over to Illinois Central. Here's the coal fields they were going to. For Monroe County, it was convenient because it went through the part of the county that didn't have a railroad. Wasn't that awesome? Unionville Station had a depot. I know that's why some of you came. I'm just going to tell you right now, it had a depot. There you go. Later known as New Unionville, depot built 1906. I don't know when it ended. Passenger service 1906, sometime in the 40s. So really rough country out by Unionville. Here's the Illinois Central that gets built. They go through a tunnel here and on down. They're not near Unionville itself, and they can't get to Unionville. And so they keep building on down the road, and eventually there's a spot way down the road that's kind of flat, and they're like, that's where we'll put the Unionville Depot, and we'll call that Unionville Station, and that becomes New Unionville. There's a picture of the tunnel. Really rough country out there. So here's the State Board of Tax Commissioners for 1917, and yes, there was a depot at Unionville, well, Unionville Station. $600 was its value. I also have this description. I just got this week. Thursday, this was emailed to me. The railroad terminal in Benton Township was located a short distance east of where Bethel Lane crosses the railroad tracks in New Unionville, Indiana. This terminal was used both for freight and passengers. Beside the main set of tracks is a siding, a set of tracks where boxcars could be switched onto for loading and unloading. The station at New Unionville was a building measuring 12 feet by 32 feet. It was a wooden building set on a concrete floor. The enclosed office was 12 feet by 15.5 feet. The loading platform was 12 feet by 17.5 feet. The door and windows faced the track. From these windows, the station master could see all the activity up and down the line. The station stood about 8 feet from the tracks. The building was furnished with 2 small benches for the passengers to sit upon while waiting for their train. A large wood stove stood in the center of the room, furnishing the heat during the long winter months. Sam Wakefield was the station master. He handled the freight, sold passenger tickets, and ran the telegraph at the terminal for the railroad and public messages. A place near the terminal was called a log and tie yard. The area timbermen brought their logs and ties to this yard, where Richard Ratliff was the overseer and buyer. Much of the timber was bought shipped to Indianapolis. There you go. Yes? From this gentleman right here, Jeremy Brashear.
Martha Bell Young helped me with my covered bridge book, and that was in her library that she put together years ago.
And the Youngs have been in Unionville forever. They are Unionville. So.
Her husband, I believe she said her husband went and measured that, but they didn't have cameras, so they didn't take pictures.
Because that's the thing I want for Christmas, and I never get it, is a picture of that depot. I don't know what it looked. It probably looked a lot like Trevlac. They were all the same type of depot. And Trevlac doesn't have windows, so I think it's probably the same type. There's where it was located, the Recycle Center in New Unionville. That's probably where it was, right there by the entrance to the Recycle Center. Yes?
If you go through the recycling center, as you're leaving the end gate, look to your left, there's a concrete pad poured over there, but I don't know if that's from the depot.
That is from the section gang, the track gang, the speeder house.
Okay.
So I saw that I just went there 2 days ago to verify this and saw that exact thing. And it says it has a concrete floor for the depot, so I imagine if you poked around, you might find some remains of it, but I haven't done that. So now Illinois Central has a Bloomington depot. 1906 passenger depot, limestone, of course. In use, 1906, 1945. Burned, demolished, I don't know. But it happened sometime after 37 and before 45. The baggage house still stands. There was also a freight depot, which still stands. So by the time the Illinois Central gets to Bloomington, the town's built up. They don't have the luxury the Monon did of going wherever they wanted, so they build across the north side of town. They put the depot as close as they can to the downtown. They thought about putting it by IU, but they settled between College and Walnut, in line with the courthouse. And then they put their freight station down here on a spur. Here they are building the railroad through Bloomington. I don't know which bridge crossing this is. I will figure that out eventually. And here's the pleasant little depot they built on top of the hill in between College and Walnut. The depot's on the left, the baggage house is on the right. Here's another view of it. No, it was known as the Indianapolis Southern at first. That was the business that the guys had built, and then the Illinois Central took it over, and eventually they just renamed it the Illinois Central. But there is an interim period where people are confused about the name. Here they're calling it the Illinois Southern, where they have crossed it all up. But it's our depot. This is taken in 1918. Troops going to World War I training, probably in Indianapolis because it's on the Illinois Central. There's a marching band on the depot platform. Everybody's yelling. They were just so excited back then. This is a view of the approach to the depot. Those are wagons parked along the way. Hunter's mansion would be just out of the picture up here. Okay. At some point, they built a crazy chimney on top of the baggage house. I don't know why. I'm trying to figure it out. I know it was there in 1919, dominating groups. But then it's gone by 45, and also the passenger depot's gone too. So it was there in 37. And then sometime between 37 and 45, it's destroyed. I imagine it burned. And then it's replaced by this, they still have a little shed that used to be in between the baggage house and the passenger depot. And so the baggage house becomes the new passenger depot, and that little shed serves. And then passenger service ends in 45. When World War II comes, the Illinois Central abandons passenger service. They never bring it back. And it becomes the Bloomington office. And kind of keeps falling apart until a Japanese restaurant gets a hold of it, and then they name it Ekame, which means train station, and serve sushi out of it. And then now the building's still largely the same in that configuration, but it's currently abandoned again and for sale if anybody would like to buy it. So there's where the passenger depot still sits there today between College and Walnut. Here's the spur line I drew in orange, and there's the freight depot. Here's a 70s picture of the freight depot. I don't have any pictures of the freight depot when it was in operation. Here is abandoned and partially burned, and then Bill Cook gets a hold of it, and he saves it. So the two guys who saved depots in Monroe County are Johnny Baker and Bill Cook. Two totally different stories. But Johnny Baker is my hero. I want you to know. And then we have the station as it stands today. Next up is Kirby, also called County Home. It gets its name from the Kirby Schoolhouse, Kirby Road, and the county farm or the Poor Asylum. That's the county farm. If you would be sentenced there, do time on the farm. Here's a 30s map showing the railroad end. That's where it crossed Kirby Road. There's the county farm still on the map. Here's my only description of Kirby. At Kirby, the facilities are quite meager, consisting of a short spur siding, stockyards, and a center platform, but without even a shelter shed for depot accommodation. That's it. There's Kirby today. Probably everything's sat by where that booth is, but I don't know. Elwren, last one on the list. Way on the far edge of the county. And what Elwren was a station stop for Stanford, but they couldn't make Stanford the same way they couldn't make Unionville. And so they put in Elwren. And there was a depot, $600. They were all worth $600. And here's my description of Elwren. Elwren is supplied with a depot for passengers and freight, the usual switches and sidings, stock pins, telegraph service, and has an agent in charge. Very little freight is received or shipped from Kirby Elwren is the more important point from which some stock is shipped in carloads. No grain is shipped from the latter, which would be Kirby, and nor is there a mill or elevator there. So Elwren was a little more important, but still not a very big place. It probably looked a lot like Helmsburg or Trevlack or Morgantown or one of those depots, but I have no pictures. And there's where it sat. So here's what we've learned. There were 24 stations, 21 passenger stations, 1 maybe. There were 14 stations with depots. That blew my mind. And 1 maybe. And that's the end. Thank you very much for your time. Anybody has questions, I'd be happy to entertain them, or if you want to come up and talk to me, that's cool too. Yes? You have to read all about the history of the Monon for that. But he ends the Kentucky excursion or incursion and dooms the Monon Railroad to only be in Indiana from then on. Yeah.
Curious about the fry program. Why did you say he was bad?
That's what I was just explaining to her. He basically took the Monon and made it only an Indiana railroad, and it would never be able to expand. And so he sort of doomed the Monon to a second-rate tier of railroads. All right, thank you very much.